So I noticed in some of my last few videos, and I want to say in some of the previous batches of videos I've done, I've referred to IPs. And normally I've been referring to IPs as IP addresses, Internet Protocol addresses, when it comes to networking with like technical stuff like computer networking. But I've also been using the term IP when we're trying to discuss like different forms of media, movies, TV shows, and whatnot. But we've never actually clarified what an IP is in terms of like ideas and stuff, not the computer networking stuff, but IP when it comes to business, different ideas and stuff like that. We've never talked about that. So for this video, I want to go ahead and clear up the term IP, intellectual property, and just give a little bit of an intro into what that subject is. Some people know this, some don't. And again, it's easy to get this confused when it comes to tech people who think IP solely as IP addresses when it comes to computer networking, but there's also IP in terms of business, copyrights, patents, and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's go ahead and get started. So just from the outside looking in, from what I can tell, it's safe to say that all forms of business revolve around IPs. Well, most forms of business revolve around IPs or intellectual properties. An intellectual property is basically anything that you can imagine. Like I kind of said earlier, it's an idea. At least it should start off in as idea. Now, there are different legal ways to protect those ideas, and they all have their own different rules that we'll cover in a little bit. But an intellectual property at its core is an idea that, generally speaking, you have to bring to life in order for it to be effective and to be used. This covers pretty much everything from music. We've all heard about, albums or singles that have been delayed because of copyright issues. Copyrights are one of the ways that you are protecting intellectual property, something that you or another entity created, but maybe you're trying to borrow a piece of it, right? In terms of music sampling, for example. This also goes for branding when it comes to logos, slogans, and the like. Those type of things are all different versions of intellectual property. And I think comic book heroes in general are a pretty good example for this concept because we deal with this all the time, especially with the rise of the MCU and fall recently. But the initial rise of the MCU, and then a lot of people got invested, and we were starting wondering, hey, where's this character? Where's this character? Why haven't they brought this character in? Just to find out, well, Marvel doesn't have the rights to that IP, that intellectual property, that particular comic book character. Like, I think for a time, Blade didn't show up in the MCU because they were owned by, was it Sony or Fox? One of the two. I know Spider-Man, that whole thing between Sony and Marvel is a thing. It just goes on and on. But when you get to the Avengers and its individual heroes, X-Men, its individual heroes, if you want to stretch it out to DC, you have the Justice League and its various heroes and subgroups, including Batman Inc. and all that stuff. There are certain characters that will show up in the media, in the movies and TV shows and whatnot, but behind closed doors, for those who don't know, there are people in boardrooms and stuff like going back and forth, trying to figure out, well, hey, you have the rights to this character, but our fan base for our work wants to see this character in this space. So what agreement do we need to come to so that we can satisfy these people? If we can't satisfy them, well, then we're just never going to make a movie about this character or a TV show about this character, or we'll just wait until your rights to this IP expires and then it's up for grabs and we'll just buy it from you. So as I just mentioned earlier, there are a few different ways legally to protect your different intellectual properties and your ideas, your creations that come from your head. There are different ways to legally protect them. And there are different forms of legal protection depending on what type of invention or idea we're talking about here. This is where patents come into play because patents apply to both inventions and innovations. The original cell phone, someone had to place a patent on that. But when it came to, say, the Apple iPhone, when it initially rolled out, and other touchscreen phones that soon followed, they had to place patents on those devices as well. A patent is basically used so that people cannot try to pass off somebody else's invention as their own. So yeah, the concept of a cell phone may not have been the invention of Apple or any of the other cell phone companies or tech companies based in the States and even internationally, but their individual inventions, the way they've spun it from the iPhone, again, when it initially hit the market, to even now, I believe it's a Google phone. That's a modern day phone, has a large touchscreen and everything, but it somehow can still fold so you can take better pictures. It's basically a flip phone, but still manages to keep the touchscreen completely intact. I'm pretty sure there's a patent for that. But the thing is, some people will try to pass off somebody else's invention as their own, when they know it's a moneymaker, it'll be a good cash grab. So they want to slap their name on it. And there's a bit of racial history behind this. So I may do another history lesson. If that's something you guys want me to look into, then let me know, because that's actually kind of an interesting subject for me. But yeah, when it comes to patents and you want to make sure people know exactly who you are, and that you and maybe another person or a group of people played roles in creating something brand new or even an innovation. You innovated on something that already existed, but it's like still brand new to the market. Again, cell phones were nowhere near new, but the iPhone in its own right was just a whole different monster in itself that just built on the concept, which still required them to patent it so that other competitors won't push out a device that says, we're releasing the iPhone and it's under our name. And it's like, well, hold on, you guys didn't build this. Yeah, but did you legally bind it to you? That's what patents are meant to do. The second way to protect an IP is called a trademark. Basically, a trademark is meant to protect anything that allows people to identify your business or your brand. So naturally, you're talking about marks that identify your brand. The number one thing that should come to mind would be a logo. That's normally a way to do it, but there are other things that it applies to. This can also apply to your company name as well as your company slogan. I don't know if it can pertain to like a combination of colors or certain fonts and whatnot. Say Coca-Cola or Disney, for example, both of the fonts that those companies use are unique to themselves, like nobody else uses it. But I don't know if that will require a trademark because I think they're original fonts. But I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if those did have their respective trademarks, because since they're very unique to those respective brands, no other company can just pop up and start using Disney's font to promote their brand, because people are going to start thinking that Disney is somehow affiliated with this whole separate company, and they may get successful off of that, but that's not necessarily the best thing to do. So I wouldn't be surprised if that type of thing was also like a trademark would also apply to that type of thing. The third way to legally protect an intellectual property is called a copyright. And this one should be pretty easy to understand because, again, especially if you're a music head and you keep up with music, or you just like music in general as a person, and you usually keep up with different versions of music news, if you kind of keep up with it, then this shouldn't be an issue, because especially when it comes to rap in particular, which has produced its own music, but it's especially recently, like for the last decade and a half or so, it's focused on sampling previous works of art instead of kind of creating things that are completely brand new, which is why a lot of people say it's pretty dull these days, myself included. The whole thing with copyrights, when you get that news of, hey, this artist was supposed to drop their album on December 1st, at the bottom of the year, but now it's going to be delayed until after New Year's because of copyright issues. When they're saying that they're most likely trying to borrow a piece of somebody else's music, or maybe like a movie soundbite or something like that, some form of intellectual property that the artist or producers want to borrow and put into the project, into the album, into the mixtape, but it hasn't been cleared. They have to run that past certain people that created the original material. So whoever originally wrote the movie and played part in the movie that they want to sample a soundbite from, from people who they want to sample an original song, R&B joint or jazz joint from the 70s or 80s, if not before that. And now they have to get in contact with the estate of the artist. If the artist or group themselves are not alive, it becomes a whole thing. But they basically need to get permission from the original creators of that work to say, hey, okay, you can go ahead and sample and borrow a piece of our old work. In exchange, you have to give us 10% of whatever revenue comes from the single, or 10% that comes from the overall project, depending on how big the bite is, right? That's where you get into copyrights. So this one's a little more familiar for us. So the fourth way to legally protect the intellectual property is called a trade secret. And I want to say trade secrets and copyrights, if I remember correctly, are pretty similar. But there's a key difference here or at least when it comes to copyrights, these can obviously apply to books, music, sheet music, all that stuff. But the whole thing with, I want to say copyrights in particular, is that you can't copyright something that you have not physically created. It needs to be a finished product, whether it's some type of process that you've created that's never been done before, or if it's, again, books, music, and stuff like that. Yeah, you may have an idea for original music that's going to be mind-blowing and people have never heard anything like it, and it's all up here. you can't legally protect something that's still up here. So you would have to write the music, the sheet music, the lyrics, all that stuff, and you would have to get that copyrighted so that it's protected by your name. So that when people try to, again, if people were to attempt to push this original music and slap their name on it, you've already applied a copyright to it saying, hey, I have the sheet music, I have the lyrics and whatever else. I created this. You're just trying to borrow it. So you owe me money for it. So I'm going to go back to an example, a conversation I had with an old college professor of mine when I was working on my master's. And it was for, I think it might have been my information technology management class itself. And my professor at the time, we were using Iron Man as our main example to go back and forth when it comes to getting me to understand the differences between these, because I had to look into these before. And trade secrets was one detail that was still kind of throwing me off, because I was trying to figure out, if you're talking about a trade secret, which, let's define that first before we move forward with the example. I got off track there. A trade secret is any idea that the public does not know about, but you put to use. It's confidential information to you. So it's basically the whole concept of the Krabby Patty secret formula, which I think as of now, it's officially been put out. But at one point, one of the key things about SpongeBob SquarePants, the TV show, was that his job, the Krusty Krab, their famous burgers and all that stuff, people were addicted to them, they love them, but they never told anyone what exactly they did that made the Krabby Patties like so great, right? So at one point, the Krabby Patty secret formula would have been considered a trade secret, because they're physically producing stuff with it. They're producing the meals and all this other stuff, and it's super popular, but the general public can't just Google, hey, what's a Krabby Patty secret formula, in Bikini Bottom. They didn't have the ability to do that. With that said, the Krabby Patty secret formula would have been information that was proprietary to the company. It was owned by the company, but the general public doesn't know anything about it, which also means your competitors shouldn't know anything about it as well. So going back to my example with my college professor, we were trying to use Iron Man to go over these different forms of legal protection for IPs, particularly focusing on trade secrets. And one of the things I kept asking and trying to wrap my head around was, if you had Tony Stark when he was initially trying to create the Iron Man suit, and if, what's his name? Hammer, Justin Hammer, I believe he was from AIM. And if he was to somehow pick up on the fact that Tony was working with something and basically stole the suit and pass it off as his own, would he be able to basically claim ownership of the Iron Man suit and lie and say that it was his the whole time, right? And the one thing that my teacher tried to explain to me was, the thing is, you can't keep, you can keep a trade secret, obviously a secret, but you still need some form of legal protection. And as we just cleared up a second ago, all intellectual property that you create has to be actually produced in some way, whether you typed it up, you wrote it, or you physically created whatever the invention, the device is. It needs to be concrete. It can't remain an idea. So if we're using Tony Stark as an example, and if he was to keep the Iron Man suit to himself, but he never legally protected it because he didn't want the general public to know about it at all, and someone managed to steal it from him, legally protect it, most likely put a patent on it, and then tried to bid it off to enemy states or even the US government and stuff like that, Tony wouldn't get any of the money. Whoever stole it from him, let's say Justin Hammer in this case, he would get that money, because now legally the invention, the Iron Man suit, is tied to him. Tony may have the skills necessary to keep upgrading and stuff like that, but at least for a short-term win, that original Iron Man suit, that money for it is going to go to Justin Hammer or whatever villain that stole it from Tony, because Tony never legally protected it. If Tony had placed a patent on that Iron Man suit, legally protected the Iron Man suit by calling it a trade secret, and still legally put it on record that it's tied to him, and then if Justin Hammer tried to steal the suit and then push it off as his own, that's when it wouldn't work, because it's legally binding to Tony. The general public may not know about it. They may not even still not know that he's Iron Man to begin with. But someone somewhere is going to have documentation that the original Iron Man suit would belong to Tony. So whether it's Jebediah Stane or, again, Justin Hammer or anyone else, anybody that would try to steal that suit from Tony or that intellectual property and try to push it off as his own, it wouldn't work. But what I eventually came to understand was, again, if you've invented something, if you've built something and it's working, but you don't legally protect it, and someone tries to jack it from you or does manage to steal it from you, and they push it off as their own, you're SOL. There's really nothing you can do. That's the understanding I've reached. I would say just understanding the basic concept of what intellectual property is a good way to start. No matter what venture you go into, you don't even have to invent anything or build anything. Just the way that business is conducted, because even if you don't run your own business and you don't create your own gear, even like if you climb the corporate ladder long enough, you're eventually going to most likely run situations where you have to deal with different forms of IP, their legal protection, SLAs, stuff like that. I think just as a beginner level concept, it's just good to know. And then, of course, if you ever get into a legal situation that centers around an IP and any of the legal forms of protecting it, then of course go to a legal professional to actually know what they're talking about when they have to really, really get into it. So yeah, whether you want to be an entertainer, whether you want to stick to the 9 to 5 corporate ladder, white collar work, blue collar work, there's even pink collar work, and I don't even know what that looks like. Entrepreneurship, all that stuff, tech, fintech, medtech, medical, whatever the case is. Either way, whatever avenue you choose to go with your life, I just think this is good information to know and to at least kick off the process of looking into it. If you climb up high enough into a job and management roles and whatnot, then you're probably going to, again, run into this stuff eventually. So it's just good to get a decent understanding of it. But also, even if it doesn't affect you, if it affects your favorite celebrity, rapper, singer, whatever the case may be, and all that stuff, then it just makes it easier to translate what people are saying. Because when people bring up some of the legal terms, copyrights, patents, and whatnot, I think most people don't know it, and it just goes over most of our heads. We just know that somebody got screwed, and that's usually enough for us, right? But just to take it a little bit deeper and kind of pull that curtain back a little bit. So hopefully this was helpful, guys. I'm gonna go ahead and leave the video off here. If you have any feedback or comments for me, leave that for me in the comment section below. I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.